Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Craft University. I am so happy to have you. My name is Aaron Gore. We'll get into all that in a minute, but today we're doing something a little bit different. A lot of times you'll see me on here, and I've been very fortunate to speak with experts from a wide variety of different expertises, wide variety of different specialties from across the craft beer industry, trying to address some of the problems that you have. But one of the things that we come back to regularly is this idea of data. Now, when I say data, what I know a lot of you are hearing is, linear regressions and R values and, that statistics class that we all know that you fell asleep in during high school. Listen, we all did it, but that's not really what we mean. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to be a data scientist. You don't have to be a statistician to still understand the fact that the more that you're able to understand your business, the better you're able to make decisions about your business. And for a lot of us, we don't necessarily have all the time in the world. I know that I don't. I'm wearing many hats in a given week, and that's just in the software space. When I was running breweries, it was infinitely more. And I know that a lot of you are stuck in that exact same position. So that's why today we're going to be talking a bit about how tools, how analysis, how AI, and how expertise can really help you to get information, get insights, and get something useful out of the data that you already are collecting, the data that already exists. Now, this isn't going to be one big sales pitch for Beer 30. I mean, most of you, I hope by now, know that that's what I do for my day job, but we really want this to be something that's usable for whatever system you're using, even if you're not using a system, even if you're on pencil and paper, even if you're on spreadsheets still, or if you are using one of our competitors, or if you're using someone like my guest today, Jeremy Carney, who really specializes in being able to build out some of this analysis and give you more out of your data without you having to go digging or having to do a lot of guesswork on your own. And that's why I'm happy to introduce Jeremy. But Jeremy, how you doing today, man? Appreciate you being on.
Good, yeah, doing good. Thank you. I got a little nervous there. You said normally we have some sort of expert on to talk about a topic, and then you kind of got into introducing me. So,
And he is very much an expert, I assure you. Jeremy, tell everybody where you're from a bit, and let's get right into it.
yeah, cool. And actually, let me share my screen here because we got
Amazing.
a slide for that. Cool. Let's see. Aaron already got us through these first few. Let me have
And
one
we are
more.
good to go on that.
Cool. Okay, so that's me. I have about 20 years working with data, not, I guess, technically an expert, according to Aaron, but I'm getting there. I think maybe after the next couple of weeks I'll be there. Yeah. But I've also been spending the last 3 years really focused on craft beer data, craft beverage data, and it's really been a fascinating time for me, especially like Aaron mentioned. Like my industry of data analytics has been just completely blown up with AI the last few years. And it's like making people rethink like what's the point of even looking at data? Is there a better way to do it than we've done it in kind of the legacy versions of this? So super exciting time to be in this space and then also in the industry. I'll get into a little bit more. I've been working on a solution called Brewery Brain, which is what's really cool about this now is instead of just analyzing data on its own, like I used to do for 20 years, now we're able to infuse a lot of additional knowledge and context and really combine qualitative and quantitative information and data to be able to come to really interesting insights. And you guys will get some examples of that today. As we're looking through there, this is all the demos. We're going to do a lot of demoing, so we won't PowerPoint you to death. Um, all that's kind of in synthetic data. So if you're one of my customers listening, don't get nervous that I'm about to show your specific stuff on here. But it should match what a real brewery looks like. So with that, I will give you guys the agenda a little bit more. Here's how we're going to spend the hour. I was planning to speak for 3 hours, but Aaron whittled me down to an hour, so we're going to
If
cram it
we
all
don't
in.
set a time limit, I know that both of us could fill that time way too easily, and these people got jobs to do.
Yeah, yeah, I guess someone has to make the beer. So pretty straightforward. First, we're going to talk a little bit about why this matters. Aaron already got into that a little bit. I'll let him give a few more minutes on the next slide, just about some experiences that he's had in the industry. As he talked about, he's done a little bit of everything. So He's seen how people use data in decision making in a lot of different ways, what's been good, what's been bad. Then we'll spend the majority of the time on that loop. And I won't fully explain it now because I have a slide that does that a little bit better. But this loop that we're going to be walking people through, which is alert, analyze, act, and assess, we think it's really critical. And it doesn't just work for data analysis, it's really a decision-making loop, right? And so we'll get into that and how you can infuse data into that type of loop for decision making. Like I mentioned, we'll be doing a lot of this with a live walkthrough of some demos. So I think that'll be interesting to see how it's being handled. In this case, we're going to be kind of tracking down a margin issue that a brewery is having, which sometimes can be pretty hard for a brewery to get to all the different data that feeds a good margin analysis. So we'll take a look at that. And then at the end, we're just going to go ahead and wrap it up and kind of tell you some next steps and how you can get some more information. And before I pass it off to Aaron on the next one, just on the bottom, I want to mention I'm going to be showing kind of some new capabilities using AI, cutting edge, but none of that needs to be done. Like Aaron said, if you're writing things down on a whiteboard in your brewery, if you're using a spreadsheet, really that loop, the decision-making loop that we're going to be talking through, can fit at any of those phases. So don't think that like maybe you don't have some of the capabilities I'm going to be showing today, that all of this is meaningless. We really think it's useful for a brewery in any phase that they're in. Cool. So Aaron, I'm going to pass it back to you for a second. Walk us through this one.
Absolutely. So, how do most breweries make their decisions? And, the truth of it is that most breweries are making the decisions purely on gut. You get a feel for your business, and that feeling is real. And, you start getting a general sense of what you should be doing, how you should be making decisions. The problem is that's really built on anecdotes and it's built on opinion and it's built on the same kind of biases, the same kind of priors that any of us are subject to. And if you don't have the data in front of you, if you don't have something that you're able to reference and able to use to understand what's actually happening, be able to find patterns that aren't necessarily obvious but are absolutely critical or important, then what you're really doing is educated guesswork. And at the end of the day, if this was, a game of, risk, if this was a game of Monopoly, that's not a huge deal. But, your house may be on the line with an SBA loan. You've got staff members who rely on you to keep your doors open for them to be able to pay rent. The stakes are high. It's one of the things that makes this industry so demanding, but it's also one of the things that makes it so rewarding. But it does mean that it's incumbent on you to be able to do everything that you can to make the best decisions and truly understanding the situation that you find yourself in, truly understanding the opportunities and the threats. That is absolutely critical to being able to do so. So right now, for a lot of breweries, they're really just going off of what's in front of them because you wake up, you check on the tanks, you're recording everything on your dailies, you're checking in with your front of house manager, you're opening up the doors, you're dealing with customers all day. You might run a couple of kegs down to the account down the street. What you're not doing is being able to sit and work on the business rather than working in the business. So that's what we're going to talk about. And Jeremy's going to cover some of those questions that you need to be visiting every single week to make sure that you have a good understanding ahead of time. So rather than being reactive, you're able to proactively attack what's in front of your business. Jeremy, can you go in a little bit of what that loop looks like?
Yep, will do. And laid the groundwork there really good, I think. Mentioned some of this in the beginning, but this is really a kind of a decision-making loop that we're going to be going through. So the first thing you need to do when you need to make a decision, right, is first you need to kind of know something needs a decision. So what we're trying to do in this alert phase is make it really obvious and easy for people to know that, hey, something in my brewery needs me to focus on it for a little while. There could be 1,000 different things you can work on in a brewery. So it's really important also in this alert phase to make sure that you're being alerted on some of these priority things that are most critical. And then once you know that something's maybe going off track, in order to be able to take an action on it, you have to analyze it a little bit more and really start to drill in and understand what the root cause of that issue might be. So you can take a smart, pinpointed action. So that's the next step in that analyze phase. Then we're not all just analyzing data for fun, although I guess I do a little bit of that, but most people don't. So next up is the whole point of this is to take some sort of action or make some sort of decision. So that's that next one in the act phase. And then one that sometimes gets forgotten, and I get it, like everybody's so busy, right? It's like you take an action, you make a decision. Oh, next thing you know, you're on to the next one. Then you're on to the next one. And maybe in a given day, you're making like 20 different decisions. And some of those are pretty small, so you don't always need to follow up with all of them. But especially on the bigger ones, I really think this assess phase is an important one. And I don't know if you guys can see those, so let me close it. So that assess phase is once you've made a decision, go back, a week later, a month later, 3 months later, whatever it is based on that decision, and go back and make sure it worked. And if it didn't, well, that's okay, right? Because you can still continue to tweak it, pivot, make additional actions as you move forward. So really want to stress this problem solving loop, I think works really good, and we'll definitely show how you can feed data into it to make it more interesting. And then I mentioned some of this on what I have on the bottom of the slide there is I really think this works across any brewery, any size. So don't be intimidated or anything by some of the stuff we'll be showing today. Okay, cool. And I mentioned this before, Coastline Craft is kind of this demo brewery we're going to be working with. All of this should look very similar and behave very similar to data you're used to seeing within your brewery, but it is synthetic data here. Okay, so we're going to dive into the first one, how we're going to handle each of these four different steps. I'll provide a little bit of information. I'll be passing it over to Aaron to add a little bit more color about what he's seen in the industry. And then we'll go and do some live demo about what this looks like in real life. So first of all, and I already talked through some of this, but alert is really knowing when something is going off track. So like the last part of that sentence, off track, is a key piece of this, is need to measure our performance to a goal or a prior period or some sort of number that adds a little bit more context around it. Otherwise, a number is just kind of a number. And it's hard to alert on just that number without that context. So we know if something's off track. And I mentioned this before, but in a brewery, you could chase 1,000 different things, right? And nobody has time for that. So really important to make sure you're getting alerts, especially these alerts that are pinging you when there's something is a problem. You don't want 100 different alerts coming and texting your phone every day, right? Because it's just going to be noise. You're going to ignore all of them, basically. So important to make sure that when you are getting an alert pushed to you, to make sure it is something that does need your focus. And I think I talked about the last part. The last piece of it, though, is really the discipline of this is the whole game. It's like people can set up a really cool alert, but if you only have like the infrastructure to have it fire once, well, that's not really helping you, right? Because the one time it doesn't fire could be the one time that you have a problem in your brewery. So instead of setting up 1,000 alerts, it's more important like get one of them working right where it comes to you every single time consistently. And that's really how you can use it to help solve these problems. Cool. So as I go to this next one, Aaron, you have any thoughts on how you've seen this done at kind of different stages of a brewery?
Absolutely, Jeremy. So, alert. The first thing you have to do is understand that there's something that needs your attention in the first place, to Jeremy's point. The challenge there is that, the further away from having some sort of system of automation you get, it can be a lot harder to be able to spot those. Not impossible, and there's some good steps for discipline to help make that happen. But if you're on pencil and paper, if you're not even using Excel, even to or some sort of spreadsheeting app to help run your brewery, it becomes a challenge because really what you need is not only to be taking regular recordings, and I mean regularly cadenced, recorded in the same format, you also have to have the ability to notice that it's not hitting where it needs to be, which means being able to reference targets for fermentation, historical sales, the expectations, even if things are trending the right or the wrong way for things like pH, gravity, temperature. So absolutely critical if you're going to be doing this on paper is to make sure that you are drilling all the way down into not just what you're recording, but how it compares to where you'd expect and how it compares to what it has been previously. And this can be pretty easy. You can do, when you use the term spreadsheet these days almost exclusively to refer to things like Excel, but in practice, those are based on hand spreadsheets. And even your daily logs, your fermentation logs that you're taking pencil and paper, the whiteboard that you're using for task management, those really are spreadsheets in their own way. So the most important things there are record that data consistently. Make sure that you include data about how it relates to expectation and how it relates to prior readings. If it's fermentation, prior historicals, if it's something like sales, and make sure that you're doing it in the same format at the same times every single time. That helps you actually be able to get something out of this and understand that something's deviating from where you'd expect it to be. Same thing in a spreadsheet. The nice thing about spreadsheets these days is setting up conditional formatting, setting up alerts. The ability to call out deviations is pretty easy. Where you really lose a little bit of visibility is it's only really going to be able to call out issues that you think of ahead of time. Things that you think to set up those conditions for, things that you think to look for in the first place. Huge step forward though, and the nice thing about it is it's easily manipulatable, and you can continue to set those up and to Jeremy's point, get those working consistently once you do know what to look for and once you've been able to assess some of your prior success. But as we start diving into the automated side, I know, Jeremy, you're going to speak a little more to some of the more advanced things that people are able to do. I know on Beer 30 side, on the brewery software side, we have the ability to set up phone and email notifications if something, for example, like brew logs or fermentation or out of sorts, or if a customer hasn't necessarily ordered in X amount of time. We even have live fermentation curves that we can compare against, but that still is going to get you, most of the way there. There's a lot more tools than you've ever had before. So can you speak a bit to how this looks like in a fully mature data environment?
Cool. Yep, we'll do. And this is where we'll do a little more demo here. Before I show that, just want to say one thing with alerts that we're trying to solve for is like we want an alert to hit a person right in their normal course of work. So like what Aaron said, if text alerts are going out to someone's phone, and what I'm going to show a lot of today is Slack. A lot of breweries use Slack in order to just do their internal communication. So if we can get an alert that something's going on with data right there in like one of the threads where a team is already talking about something, that's a really good spot, right? So really important to try to get an alert as close as possible to the people's normal course of work so they don't have to like go sit down at a computer and log into another system and do 5 different clicks until they see their alert. That kind of defeats the point. So try to get it as close to their line of work as possible. Okay, so let me pull up my Slack. Oh, that wasn't the one, sorry. Some of the fun of a live demo here. Okay, cool. So this is going to be, if people are familiar with what Slack looks like, this would be a message coming through Slack. And we'll give you an example of what this one looks like. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be kind of diving through gross margin, tracking down a gross margin issue. So, and this would go to a group. In this case, it's more maybe finance related, more like a leadership level alert. So that's kind of how we're going to talk about this one, maybe. But others can be very low level, very tactical that go out to more like frontline staff. So first of all, usually with an alert, we're going to try to make it obvious. Is it green or is it red? Is something going good or something going bad? In this case, we're already starting to see that gross margin is a little bit under what the target was. As everybody knows, though, like a lot of the top line metrics that people watch, whether it's gross margin or sales, or maybe like a labor number, sometimes it's hard to impact that top line number directly because there's like 3 or 4 different drivers underneath, which are more like leading indicators kind of that, what ultimately is going to happen with that top line metric. So that's what we're trying to do here is basically take what happened in margin. And I usually think of margin being composed of 3 different things. Your price, your cost, and then like the mix of how you're selling different products. So what it's trying to do is take the first cut there, and in this case, it's pointing us to cost, saying, hey, it's really a cost issue that's driving your margin down. So that's already starting to like narrow it down on what we need to focus on in order to move that high level gross margin number. And then the cool thing about AI is like I was kind of warning people before, don't watch 1,000 different things. If you're doing it manually, I definitely agree with that because you just can't keep up with it. The cool thing about some of these new automated systems is they can watch 1,000 different things, right? And they can only surface them to you as there's something interesting going on there. So in this case, kind of behind the scenes, The system knows, hey, we got a margin problem. We've identified it's a cost and a little bit of a mix issue. So what it's going to do is some additional analysis and say, can we find anything that might be explaining this? And that's what it's doing down here. And one of these we'll track down a little bit further on the next step. But it's really taking the first pass at trying to help people understand where they need to focus and how they need to spend the rest of their day. Cool. But before I get into the next step, Aaron, I'll pass it back to you. Do you have any final thoughts as we kind of close out this alert section here?
Absolutely. The real goal here is how quickly you are able to understand that something needs your attention. Again, as a brewery owner, as a brewery operator, even just as an assistant brewer or front of house manager, you're always going to have a lot of things commanding your attention. This is a prioritization game, not an optimization game. You're never going to be able to get to everything. So the sooner that you understand that something's a problem, the better off you're able to fix it. You can save a dump batch if you're able to fix, a conversion issue in the mash. You're able to save an entire batch if you're able to understand that it's starting to drift outside of where you'd be comfortable with from a gravity standpoint. Maybe you have a stuck fermentation. Better to find that early than be losing potential sales because you're not going to be able to package when you thought you would. The sooner you're able to get ahead of these problems, the more likely you are to be able to fix them with minimal impact on your bottom line. So this isn't theoretical. This isn't just for fun. This is about actually being able to make you run a better business so that you can focus on the people and the beer that got you into this in the first place.
Cool. Then I will we'll move on to the analyze section next. So kind of as we're going through this loop, right? We know there's a problem. Okay, cool. So now what do we do? And really, like I mentioned, we're trying to drill down to find what is the root cause or the driver of what that issue was. So I already mentioned this before. Sometimes that top line number doesn't really get you to that point. So that's when you need to drill in deeper. And you can kind of drill in two different ways. One is look at some of those underlying metrics or KPIs that might help explain it, but also slice your business up a bunch of different ways. It could be a brand, a packaging type, a channel, a specific account, a specific time period, right? So the more you can really narrow it down, whatever that overall problem is, and get it pinpointed, that's where when we get to the next step, you can take that really precise action. So I think that's really the key of this analyze phase. How quick can you get from, hey, I know there's a problem to, oh, now I know specifically what the problem is? Aaron, have you seen how that's done in the industry before? Any insights there?
Yeah, this is one where paper really becomes a challenge. And part of the issue is what do you do with paper logs after you fill them out? You usually file them away, especially anything in the brew house. But even more generally, you can't have all of those in front of you. Desks are only so big. You only have so much wall that you can, draw red lines like your Charlie Day and that one scene from Always Sunny. You need to be able to understand how these things connect. And this is one of the hardest parts to do on paper because if you need to understand how a particular brew, for example, compares to things that you've done before. You can be digging through fermentation logs and brew logs going back months. Trying to find them is its own challenge, even if you are organized, trying to reference them and understanding exactly where things went wrong or right. This can even be for positive occasions. That is an incredible challenge. So make sure that you're really asking yourself the questions that you would want asked of this scenario if you were asking somebody about how they were handling it within their own brewery. What happened, where is that problem coming from, what is the most likely culprit, and then just work your way down trying to exclude anything that isn't the problem. Now, it's a lot easier on spreadsheets. This is one where, at least to a degree, especially if you have some sort of color coordination or you have some baselines that you're comparing against, you can kind of get a sense for where the problem is going to be just by taking a look at some of those trends. But a lot of times it's not obvious. You find yourself dropping a lot of things into graphing tools or even the graphing tools within Excel itself, just trying to get an understanding for how these changes are occurring, how they really relate to each other, because at their core, we are visual creatures. It helps to be able to have something right in front of you, and all that is only useful if you're able to see connections that you haven't necessarily thought of because you might have thousands of lines of data. Being able to get to exactly what's triggering that issue can be a challenge. So this is one of those areas where start looking for those outliers, start looking for those things that aren't where you expect them to be, and then start interrogating why. And that's critical because that metric only tells you one data point. You need to have an understanding of what could have changed as far as causation to make it that way. The more that you're able to get to the why, the better off you're going to be able to understand how to fix it, which we'll get to in the next phase. But Jeremy, speak a little to the AI portion, speak a little to the automation portion, and how this makes it easier to get to that info. Because I know with Beer 30, we have some of that. Some other software does. One thing that has been huge for us is our REST API. Interfaces really well with AI, interfaces really well with some bespoke solutions. But how would those help people actually get the cause of their problem out of all this noise of data that they're already recording?
Yep, happy to share that. So we'll do kind of go back to the next step in the demo here. And to what Aaron was saying is a lot of times, especially for a brewery that has data that live in multiple different systems, a lot of it can be hard to try to like log into each individual system and figure out what's going on. So what was kind of underlying a lot of this analysis we're doing here is trying to get all of that underlying data out and into a spot where we can start to combine data between different systems. We can clean it. We can do a lot of really good stuff. So that's what kind of underpins a lot of then what makes this usable for people. Okay, so I will pop back here real quick. So we finished up, we got an alert, right? So what I want to do now is start to drill in a little bit more to analyze what the problem is. So we're trying to pinpoint the issue. And there's a lot on the screen here. These aren't really set up to like breeze through in a quick demo. So don't worry about reading every single number on the screen. I'll kind of point out what's interesting and at least give the idea and the shape of like how we try to set up some of these analyze because no matter what system you're using, it's kind of the same process as you continue to drill in through the business. So a lot of times we're starting by just kind of reminding ourselves what the problem was. Sometimes when you're chasing a number, right, you can kind of get off on a tangent somewhere else. So it's always important to try to stay focused on what that top line number was as you drill in through the business. And you can see in this case, what it's basically doing is starting to break it down a little bit more by individual SKUs that might be impacted. In this case, we're seeing it some of these core SKUs that this brewery happens to run is seeing that aluminum price increase that we mentioned on the alert phase is really coming through and it's impacting our margin for this. Now, what starts to get pretty cool with what we can do these days, and this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, which is like take the qualitative and quantitative together and try to get some insights. So what these systems can do is, okay, it notices there was a cost increase on some different component, yeah, in this case, packaging. So what it'll do is say, hey, did we know anything about this before it hit, or was it a surprise? So what it's basically doing is going back and looking at the database of all the different notes we've entered in over the last year, and it's finding, oh, in a couple different instances, we actually knew this was coming. So just because you know something's coming doesn't mean like you're actually ready for it to hit, right? But it's always good to know, did we know about this, or is this really a surprise that we need to figure out what's going on? And then this is just starting to show what an action could be. We'll dive into action a little bit more on the next step. But taking a step back, what we basically did was we started at that overall problem. We started to drill in a little bit more. Now we know what SKUs drove it. We know if we knew about it before, we didn't. So now we're getting towards the point where we can start to take a smart action because we really know where that problem was isolated. Cool, Aaron, any final thoughts on that section?
Yeah, the key here is to get to what's actually happening. And that really was it is. You want to remove that guesswork because you really are betting resources. I have not talked to a single brewery owner in more than 15 years of being in this industry who has said, you know what we have too much of? Resources. We are all strapped for time, all strapped for cash, all strapped for cans, all strapped for ingredients. You need to make sure that when you're actually taking some of these steps to fix a problem, that you're fixing the right problem. So the sooner you're able to understand and the more accurate you're able to understand what needs your attention, the better you're able to spend only the time and only the resources that you need to resolving it. But from there, we actually have to do something about it. So, Jeremy, let's talk a little bit about the act stage.
Cool. Let's do something. Yep, next up is now that we know what our issue is and we've at least kind of know where we need to act that we think will improve performance is we're ready to take that action. So the first step on here is figuring out exactly what we're going to focus on. In this case, we're diving into margin. So we've picked out it's a cost issue that's going on. Well, just because you have a cost issue doesn't necessarily mean you have to take an action related to like that specific cost, right? Maybe you're going to actually increase price in order to cover for that cost. So you still, even though the issue is cost, you still have some different levers you can pull to try to mitigate what the impact of that cost would be. And this next one I think is really important. And it's just nothing's an action in my mind anyway, unless it has an owner of who's going to like drive that action forward and it has a date that you're going to start it. Otherwise, it's just kind of an idea, right? That might happen, but it might not. So really important to try to add that owner and a date. And what we'll see when we're able to do the date on when the action actually happened, as we'll see in the next step, assess, is then you have that baseline date. So you know what your performance was going up to that. Oh, cool. On this date, I took this action, and then you can see what your performance is after that date. So really critical not to lose sight of that date. And last thing I want to mention, and this kind of goes into the assess phase also, is sometimes in the industry, and rightfully so, especially in today's environment, sometimes people are reluctant to take actions. And in like this example we're going to walk through, which is going to be a price increase, people are reluctant to increase a price, right? Because they don't have full data, they don't know exactly what the impact of that would be. And you don't want to try to do a 5% price increase if you have a 50% volume drop because of it, right? So sometimes that just makes people really reluctant to make decisions. What I'm going to suggest as we kind of walk through this, if you're following a really good decision-making approach, is you can think of these actions more as like experiments, especially with how things are changing so frequently these days. We can't just sit in stone and just assume, well, how we've done business over the years is how we're going to continue to do it. So it's always good to run these little experiments to see what worked, what doesn't, and just become a smarter organization because of it and be able to do smarter actions in the future. So kind of think of these actions as it's just an experiment. We're going to try it. We're going to see if it worked a few weeks later. If it doesn't, no problem. No harm, no foul. Maybe profit went down a little bit, but we caught it quick enough where we can pivot. And now we're a smarter organization because we know we can't necessarily make that decision again. Aaron, any thoughts on this one?
Absolutely. A huge number of thoughts because this is really the core of all of this. Every one of these steps is absolutely vital, and we're going to get into assess in a bit, which, to Jeremy's point, is underappreciated and underutilized, but you have to take an action. There's nothing more frustrating than having everybody agree that something's a great idea, and then you meet back up again in a couple of weeks and find that no one's actually done anything about it. And to Jeremy's point, not making a decision doesn't exist. A decision that you don't make is just a decision in favor of the status quo. And for a lot of people, they freeze themselves up. But, the beautiful thing about a small business, the superpower of a small business, and that's what we are, is our nimbleness, is our ability to just do these things. You can just change your tap room prices for a couple weeks. You can cancel live music for 3 weeks, see if it makes a difference on a Friday. I've seen it go both ways. The important thing is that you're able to actually understand and see whether or not they worked and gain learnings from them. That's the assess part we'll get to. But the action is critical because you can always start procrastinating tomorrow. You need to make sure that you're setting timelines and that you're setting a horizon for these things to get done because accountability is everything in these circumstances. And this is one where paper and spreadsheets both operate very, very similarly because so much of this is just about building expectations and making sure that you have regular meetings, and that cadence is important, and regular lists of items that need to be addressed, and importantly, who needs to be addressing them so that you're able not to get people in trouble or blame anybody, but understand where it is, what's happening, who owns it, and then, if for whatever reason that timeline does need to shift or you won't be able to do it, why? That's not a blame. That's not a failure. It's just about getting more understanding because we've all been part of a group project in school where, you have like five kids and they all have a task they're supposed to do, and you still got that one kid who's the only one who buys the poster board, does the entire thing, also does the presentation, has to, yeah, and everybody gets the same amount of credit. That's not fun for anybody. Make sure that you have accountability, and that's how you ensure that these things get done because there's always going to be something else commanding people's attention. Accountability creates prioritization. Now, as you start getting into more advanced tools, it does become a lot easier. For Beer 30 in particular, and there are some other management softwares out there like Asana or Monday.com that can help with task management, project management. We have a full task manager. You can assign tasks out to people, define when they need to happen. It'll mark when it's overdue. It'll indicate for people when it needs to happen. Create a digital whiteboard. It allows you to get email or text notifications when something needs to happen. It doesn't have to get that granular. It can be a lot simpler than that. But once you have those tools in place, it helps automate the actual accountability process so that you can focus on that execution and focus on making sure that things get done. But as we start moving into some of those things that are designed to be in your existing workflows, easing that communication and using some of the learnings that we've gotten so far from AI, from these tools, Jeremy, can you tell us a bit about how this would look like in a fully mature environment?
Yep. I talked about this one already, but we're really trying to think about this as making little experiments to see what works, right? So let's kind of see an example of what that looks like. So at the end of this was our analyze phase, right? We kind of figured out what the root cause is. In this case, I'm going to go a step deeper, and this is going to be kind of a worksheet that helps us work through what action we want to take. Again, there's going to be a lot of data on the screen, so don't worry about every little thing. I'll kind of help walk it through it here. One thing we can do when there's a cost increase, and I mentioned this already, we can take actions to bring the cost down, right? We can take actions to raise the price, and maybe we have other things we got to work on this week. So we're just going to note it and watch in the future what's going on. In this case, I'm going to do the raise the price to try to mitigate at least some of that cost. So what I like to do in this step, let's do that one, is give people kind of a way to easily enter in some assumptions they have and see what the results of that would be, right? And we're trying to make people more confident to take those actions. So when we're talking price increase, we have our three items over here. And we're going to say, hey, how much do I want to raise the price on each of them? Let's say we're doing 250 here, $2 here, and 150 here. Okay, cool. And then when we're raising price, we should probably expect a little bit of volume loss. And maybe that's a problem, maybe it's not. Like in this case that we're looking at, if we raise the price on all these, even if we had a 5% volume drop, we're still in the good side on margin gains, right? So we could even plug in bigger numbers, let's say 10% here. We could take this as far as we wanted and still kind of see what's going to be the break-even point of where the volume we can expect to lose for the price we're gaining. So I think kind of walking through these scenarios instead of just like taking an action and hoping it works, try to game out what you think the results of it might be. I'm going to skip through some of this right now. One other thing I think is important, especially on a price increase, right, is it impacts our customer base. So as you're thinking about it, a price increase, in this case, this was like wholesale pricing, it would be good to know who are the main customers or distributors this is going to be impacting them. And it would be good to go and maybe you have to lay the groundwork a little bit before you start to announce it out to people. So another thing on the action step is like, don't just think through that main action you're taking, but then what are the next steps to try to get it implemented? What we're going to do on this one, then, like we talked about, right, is an action is really just an idea until it has a name and a date. So I'm just going to type in something there. But what we're basically doing is a little description of what's going on, what metric we're watching. And then this is where we use this next information in the assess phase. So we're saying, what was your baseline before we took an action? Based on some of the numbers we plugged in, what is the goal? And then when do we want to follow up on it? And then in case we forget about it, we also usually put some more information. So when we look at this a month or 3 months down the road, we kind of try to remember why we took this experiment. So I'm just going to go ahead and lock that one in here. Cool. So that's kind of how that works with how I'm thinking about it with using some of these solutions. Aaron, any final thoughts on that section?
Absolutely. You have to make sure that action is happening. Now, one thing I will say in this particular instance, talking about price increases, and this is me bringing out Aaron's soapbox a bit, based on some very recent seminars I saw at the Florida Brewers Conference, is you have to remember that, for all the talk of the reason people aren't drinking as much craft beer, being that craft beer has gotten too expensive, really is kind of missing the point. Beer has actually gone up less than inflation in terms of pricing. We're actually under indexing compared to general inflation. Still a problem for us, but it means that the issue isn't so much the price of beer, it's the price of everything else. There's just fewer dollars around and people are spending less on luxury goods in general. So play around with your pricing, but in general, a lot of breweries do have room to go up a bit, and just dropping the amount that you're charging for your beer isn't necessarily going to reflect in people having more occasions that they go out. It's become more expensive to go out in general, and your costs have exceeded the amount that beer's inflation has gone up anyhow. You need to be able to keep yourself sustainable because if you have to close your doors, it's not going to do anyone any good. So, to Jeremy's point earlier, make those experiments, make those natural experiments. It's okay to increase your prices and see if your customer base can tolerate it. They might not be able to. They might not be able to tolerate as much as you'd like them to, or they might show you that they're actually willing to still buy in pretty significant numbers. But beer isn't entirely a volume game, it's also a game of margin. So the more you're able to understand your margin, the more you're able to actually put that into practice, the better off you're going to be. But the key thing is being able to act because just tucking in, turtling, and hoping that the entire industry is going to go ahead and get better on you, that is a strategy for failure because the one thing that this industry has never been is static. It's been changing ever since Ken Grossman built dairy tanks into a new production system all the way back when he started Sierra Nevada, and it's going to continue well into the future. So you need to continue to iterate. And the better you understand your business, the better you understand what's happening today, that's going to help you inform your decision making for tomorrow. But now we got to move into the step where we're figuring out what we actually learned from all this. So let's talk about assess a bit, Jeremy, because I know that's something that you're passionate about. And that's really where the analysis side of data analytics comes in.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. Good call. We will move on to this assess phase, and we're kind of getting towards the end here. So people stick with us for another 10 minutes and we'll close this thing down. So really, this is closing the loop on that action we took. And I've already explained some of this, so I won't beat it up too much here. But what we're trying to do is, and I see a lot of people skipping this, like I mentioned earlier, it's like everyone's on to the next thing, on to the next thing. And we never actually see what the performance was of one of our decisions until, uh-oh, it's like an emergency and it shows up on the financial statement, right? At the end of the month or end of the quarter. And then it's like, oh, shoot, we're so far past where we made this decision and we should have pivoted and now it's kind of too late. So I want to make sure people really take this assess phase with the appropriate amount of effort and insight that it needs. Aaron, how have you seen people do this, or if you do see people do this in the industry today?
The biggest thing you need to do is just make sure that you're grading yourself against exactly what the problem was in the first place. You had metrics, you had data, you had information that was telling you that something was creating a challenge or creating a problem within your organization. Maybe a beer is trending the wrong direction consistently. Maybe a beer isn't selling like it used to. Maybe your margins are off. The important thing is make sure that you are actually checking back in to make sure that your remedy, your actual intervention is creating an impact and creating an impact in the right direction. Because no matter how deep into it you get with your analysis ahead of time, there's always going to be some element of assumption. You're providing that context through your experience. That's one of the things I get asked a lot is, if it's all just data, then what role does my years in this industry play? It's enormous. Data without context is like a fish without water. You need to be able to set that data within something and use that to inform your decision making based on what you're learning from the data. But you also need to check those assumptions and make sure that there isn't any bias, isn't any noise within your own assumptions and your own experience that may be confounding what you're actually getting out of it. And this is why it's so critical to check those metrics that you use to find the problem and make sure that it's actually fixing it. And then make sure that there's nothing downstream that you may not have thought of that might be getting impacted. No confounding elements that might have tied into it that you didn't expect. Jeremy pointed out earlier, you can increase price to increase margin, but one of the things that comes out of that is an expected decrease in volume. Make sure that you're checking those as well. Do it regularly and follow up enough until you're confident that those changes are sticky enough to rely on.
Cool. Let me bring this demo home then. So what we're basically doing is we just jumped in a time machine. It's 4 weeks past when we took our action. We're going to see if it holds. So normally we would try to set this up like if we have this alerting system where it's going to that 4 week later on that Monday, it's basically going to show somebody right away how that's going. And maybe everything's going great and they don't really need to spend any more time on it. But if part of it isn't going great, then we would want them to dive into it. So in this case, I'm just going to do this follow up on an action. And I'll just show for sake of time here, what we're finding is, yeah, we raised the price on all of these things. Our margin went up. But in this case, with marine, lay, or lager, which probably isn't a big surprise because lagers might have a harder time taking a price increase, the volume actually dropped 20%. And maybe when we designed this, we thought it would be 5%. So in this case, we lost some money because we took this experiment on marine, lay, or lager. The good news is these other two are still looking good. So overall, our decision to raise prices ended up good, but there's still this one that we should think about and see if there's something else we want to do with it. So like anything, we have different steps we can do. This is just giving three different options. This would end up going to another action, right? Setting an owner and following up on it. That you are now going to cut that price in half and see what happens. I'm not going to walk through that right now since we already saw what that would look like. But what's on the bottom here, and this should probably be in a more prominent section, but this is what really makes these new systems interesting, is we just did an experiment and we just learned something about our business, right? And our interaction with the market. So it's recording this as knowledge that it just learned. And it'll be looking for additional confirmation that these things happen, or it'll remember it next time we try to make a decision. For example, let's say it's a year from now and we've had some more cost increases and we want to raise prices again. It's going to remind us, hey, remember back a year ago, we tried this already. One of our beers really didn't take that price increase. The other two seemed fine and we might have room to do with it. This is what makes everything smarter so that the team in the business isn't trying to hold like all of this complex information in everybody's heads, which is where it lives a lot of the time now. And it's like, remember back last summer, didn't we do a thing? How did that end up? So trying to get a lot of that documented just out of people's heads so we can allow the system to use it in the future. So this is part of the thing I'm really excited about. As we're running these experiments, we're learning different things, then we capture those learnings and it just makes the whole system and the whole business smarter the next time. Cool. Aaron, take us home on this section.
Absolutely. The goal here, y'all, is just to make sure that you have an understanding of what worked and why, because that shortens the amount of time that you have to figuring out how to fix this in the future. Every time you run this cycle, every time you run this loop, not only will you get better at the loop itself, but you just continue to gain those learnings to where you know what to look for. You know how to remedy it. You know how to adapt and how to get back to the things that you want to focus on most importantly. And this step is critical. You have to know something worked. You have to understand why if you want to understand how to continue to make it better for the future. Because there's always going to be things that you didn't think to check. And no matter what system you're using, no matter how good it is, there's always going to be more areas that you can improve the business. And it really is a game of blocking and tackling. The more that you're able to really optimize around the edges, really make those small changes, those 1, those 2, those 5% changes, that a lot of times can be the difference between being confident in making payroll in a given month and being worried about the fact that you have a responsibility to your team, to yourself, and to your business. But take us home, Jeremy. Talk a little bit about how this all ties together and where people should go from here.
Yep, we'll do. And I think we mentioned this already, but what we're really looking to do is a calmer, less reactive brewery, right? So we're not having people just jump around firefighting today's emergencies and then they switch gears and attack tomorrow's emergencies. Trying to do all of this and have a really good system around it should be leading to a much calmer, less reactive brewery, really good decisions, and being in control of your numbers. So just real quick, a little bit more about my business if anyone's interested in more information. What we looked at a little bit today is this brewery brain solution that we're rolling out. And what it's doing is we're taking your brewery's data. And then what I mentioned, I'm really excited about this. This is like one of the most fascinating things I've worked on in 20 years of data is be able to combine all of your business knowledge and all of your business context in with that data. And then also have analytics best practices, kind of helping people understand what's going on with the business. And because it's just a lot going on behind the scenes, we're using some AI just to keep everything organized. But we're not like letting AI run your business, right? All AI is trying to do is pop up these different insights that could be interesting for you, kind of like we looked at today. But it's always going to be the human, which is the one that's actually deciding to do something differently. So just a little bit more as we close this out. I have my website down on the bottom there. You can find me. I have my email address. Sorry, Aaron, I didn't put yours on here too, but I imagine people know how to get a hold of you. Another thing we're doing is if you're able to watch this and you're interested in maybe seeing how some of this works with your brewery, we have a little discount code there. So if you get a hold of me or a hold of Aaron and we end up implementing something at your brewery, we'll be able to give you a little discount for being part of this webinar. Cool. Aaron, any final thoughts or should we open it up, see if anybody has any questions?
Yeah, didn't have any questions come through in the chats, usually where we come through. I know some folks are going to have them after the fact, so please don't hesitate to reach out to Jeremy if you do have any. We've been fortunate enough to work with him here at the Fifth Ingredient for a few years now. He actually built all of our command center dashboards directly within Beer 30. But again, you don't have to go this alone, and we know that data is not necessarily going to be everybody's thing. That doesn't mean that the decisions that can be improved by data aren't. Those are always going to be important to you, and they're always going to be important to your business. But Jeremy, wanted to say thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody who's tuning in either live or watching the recording later. And check out next month where we're going to be talking about building community, building events, and building live interactions within your own space. We're going to have T. Austin of Bad Astronaut Beer in Houston, as well as Ben Rice, stand-up comedian and craft beer industry advocate and commentator, there to talk with me about that. As always, thank you again for tuning in to Craft University. We love hearing from you. And if anybody is unfamiliar with my email, aaron.gore@thefifthingredient.com. Always love to meet new folks around the industry. Cheers.